Show me your hands, Michael. Show me your hands, Michael. Show me your hands, Michael. Drop the knife. Drop the knife. 015, we got one at gunpoint.
Drop the knife.
Drop the knife, Michael. Drop the knife. Drop the knife, Michael.
You beat
Michael. Drop the knife, Michael.
You come over here.
Michael, drop that knife, dude.
Shoot me.
Just talk. No, we don't want to shoot you, man.
Drop it.
We don't want to shoot you, man. Just talk to us. What's going on?
Shoot.
What's going on? Get away from the window. Don't, Michael, drop the knife, dude. No. Michael, don't. Clearwater 2015, shots fired. 2015, Clearwater, shots fired.
Stay back. You got cover?
I got cover. I've got cover. Michael, can you hear us? Michael, talk to us if you can hear us, man.
Today, I'm going to be talking about mental illness in law enforcement, what should and should not be done. I'm going to try and help prepare everyone out there in my listening audience for what to do with mentally ill people in crises. Hi, and welcome to Legally Insane News. I'm your host, Kyle O'Donnell. Find and follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Kyle O'Donnell, and head over to legallyinsanefilms.com to listen to my other podcasts, to read my books and articles, to check out my photos from around the world, and to watch my documentary films. Again, that's legallyinsanefilms.com. Thanks so much for joining me today. Now, before I get too far into this story, I'm not alone in my opinion that police are ill-equipped to respond to calls of mental illness and mental patients in crisis. Major networks like USA Today, The Atlantic, the Baltimore Sun, The Hill, groups like Social Welfare Action Alliance, groups like the Social Welfare Action Alliance, the Steinberg Institute, even the Sheriff's Collective at sheriffs.org, and of course the ACLU have all come out asserting that law enforcement should never be the first response to mental illness crises. The research is so overwhelming, in fact, that many dispatch departments in cop shops around the country are even starting to ask about mental health in their initial emergency calls before, officers are even dispatched to the scene. If you learn nothing else from today's talk, please come away with this. Never call the police as a first response to someone you know experiencing a mental health crisis. You should only do that in absolutely life-threatening situations. And I'm going to go into why, and hopefully by the end of this podcast, you'll be convinced to make a plan if you have a mentally ill neighbor or someone in your family who has a history of mental illness and things like that, for what to do if and when a crisis occurs. The Treatment Advocacy Center and the journal Medical Daily both did a study on police shootings and found that sufferers of mental illness are 16 times more likely to be shot by law enforcement. That's a staggering number, especially when you consider the fact that there's a hell of a lot of people killed by law enforcement every year, and they're not differentiating in this study the fact of, what the circumstances are. That's just like total number of people shot by police. 16 times more likely than everyone else. That's what mental patients, and think about that on the call, right? Think about this. If your brother is going through some mental health issue, or your sister, whomever, someone in your family, somebody that you know, just think about it when you're on the phone. 16 times more likely to be shot and killed. Before you make that call, just understand that this person, your loved one, is 16 times more likely to be shot today. Okay? So just let that sink in as we talk more about this tragic case. The study was used in an article in Time magazine that did a great job of bringing a lot of alarming statistics to the surface. So be sure to go over to the article for this podcast and check out the research that I did on that. So let's get into the story. In an incident of clear mental illness where police should never have been called to the scene, a Lewiston, Idaho man has become yet another in a long line of victims to meet his maker at the business end of a service weapon. According to NBC News, the family of Michael Trappett called 911 for assistance in dealing with a mental health crisis unfolding at their residence in Clearwater County. A body cam video was released of the incident, and at the very beginning of that video, Trappett can be heard telling the officers to just shoot him.
Dude,
Shoot me.
just talk. No, we don't want to shoot you, man.
Drop it.
We don't want to shoot you, man.
Deputy Randall Carruth can then be heard making no attempts whatsoever to de-escalate the matter while pointing his gun at Trappett. He admits that he and his partner did not want to shoot Trappett, but then very loudly and very aggressively orders Trappett to do various things like stay away from windows and put the knife down. Mental health professionals, like those suggested at the National Alliance of Mental Illness, who are more equipped than police to handle mental health patients, know that the last thing that's effective in a confrontation with a mentally ill patient is to point weapons at them while screaming at them.
Show me your hands, Michael. Show me your hands, Michael. Drop the knife. Drop the knife.
After what sounded like 9 shots fired at the suspect while he was attempting to run away from the deputies, Trappett can be heard crying just before dying at the scene.
Clearwater 2015, shots fired.
With an unfortunately coincidental name in relation to the matter, Deputy Brokekop, who was the female law enforcement officer that apparently fired her weapon first, was also the first to admit that she'd be losing her weapon.
I guess I'm losing my gun again.
Me too.
A woman related to the victim could be heard in the background pleading with police to let her out of her house before then asking police why they had just shot her family member.
Man, please stay inside, okay?
After the shooting went down, and basically for the remainder of the entire time that the officers were standing over the gunshot victim, deputies Brokekop and Carruth can be heard lamenting the possibility that they will lose their service weapons, also indicating that this was not the first time.
We didn't have a choice.
No, you didn't give us a choice. I mean, not a good one.
No, not a good one at all. Sometimes it's only bad and worse.
Then, for at least 2 more minutes of the video, instead of enacting life-saving efforts for Trappett, like CPR, the 2 deputies can be heard talking about the process that follows a shooting.
So I guess we're getting time off, or how's this going to work? Because this is my...
ISP comes out,
Okay.
and we'll go back to the office. We'll give them all our clothes and our weapons,
Okay.
and they'll take over the scene. They'll interview us within a day or 2, but not tonight.
Okay.
And then we'll be off until we are cleared for duty. So after we get interviewed,
Okay.
then we'll be set up for psych eval. And then after we're cleared by that, then we can get back to duty.
All right. Are they going to pay us at least?
Yes.
Okay. I was like, I got bills to pay.
I understand. It's paid. It's an admin leave, I guess. It would be
Okay.
something like that. It's paid.
All right.
Hi, everyone. This is your host, Kyle O'Donnell. If you've been listening to this podcast for a little while, you probably already know that I undergo a lot of research and spend a lot of time writing and recording and editing and uploading and sharing on social media. It's quite a bit of work. I also order background checks on perpetrators. I pay for public records requests. And of course, I cover all of the expenses of keeping my media online. I do all this because I love journalism and sharing stories that are important. And if you think I'm doing a good job, why not show your support? For just $3, you can become a supporting member and get full access to all the complete ad-free episodes, early access to all the episodes that are announced at legallyinsanefilms.com. You can also gain access to all those background checks and insider case files that I use in my stories. And as a supporting member, you'll also get access to several other podcasts that I do as well. If that wasn't enough, I've also spent many, many years abroad, capturing hundreds of thousands of images and filming literally dozens and dozens of documentaries from 43 countries across 4 continents. And my supporting members have access to all of that work. To join up, head over to legallyinsanefilms.com and click Join the Fan Club. That's legallyinsanefilms.com and scroll down to Join the Fan Club. Thanks for sticking around. We'll be right back after this break. No, I want to be fair here and indicate that it's got to be tough on cops, right? I don't want to be one-sided against cops that are in a tough situation. They shouldn't have been in that situation, and as I'll describe in a little bit, they made several kind of unfortunate errors in judgment as well while being there. But you know, I tend to put myself in the shoes of the people that I'm talking about, and I don't across the board think these officers had in mind to kill this man when they showed up. I mean, well, I can't say blanket statements like I don't think any cops join the force to all of them are there for altruistic purposes, but I do want to give credit where credit is due. And in that, like if I was a cop on that scene, having shot someone, my nerves would be on edge. I would be nervous. I would be anxious. I'm sure there's all kinds of emotions that go down. And part of this conversation, I'm just going to go out on a limb and give them the benefit of the doubt and say part of them just talking about this was so that they could keep their mind fixed on the job rather than the fact that there's a man dying in front of them. Now, with that having been said, what you do not hear these officers talking about is their, several weeks of training to deal with mental illness calls. You don't hear that because most police are not trained in how to deal with mental illness, let alone differentiate between a legitimate threat versus a manic depressive who just wants to, commit suicide by cop. This kind of thing happens. In the video from Caruth's body cam just before the shooting, Bro Cop can be seen approaching the victim quite fast. She wasn't quite at an all-out sprint, but it was quite fast after Trappett took several steps back from the deputies, and he kind of was at the corner of the house at the time, so they kind of pursued him as they assumed he would go around the building. I'm not sure what the threat was that they had to chase after him, but maybe they just wanted to keep him in view. I'm not sure. I can't speak for them. Now, it's hard to imagine that Bro Cop, who also shot another man in 2020 that I've linked in the article, had any ability to fire with any consistent aiming, given the very quick succession of the bullets that were fired. It also should be noted that the incident took place in what appears to be a very tightly packed neighborhood full of nearby homes.
Don't.
According to Justin Nix, a professor of criminology at the University of Nebraska, Omaha, the deputies moving in on the suspect was the absolute wrong move for them to make, stating, quote, "It happens enough. Officers rush in and make poor tactical choices, then they have to shoot their way out to protect themselves," end quote. Based on the short time it all went down and the relatively tight space of the location between the house and the garage where Trappett actually died, incongruous with the very few attempts made by the law enforcement on the scene to de-escalate the conflict, and of course the very few seconds between the time that the video starts and that Trappett is seen dying in his driveway, I might actually agree with Nix in that statement. But this isn't just a story of officers being overzealous in stressful situations. Almost all officers are going to be overzealous in stressful situations. And I think most people would be very apt to shoot first and ask questions later if they kind of assume that they could die at incidents like these. And unfortunately, when Nick says they approach the man too fast, all of a sudden they find themselves too close to the man. And what would, he could be back there swinging a knife 10 feet away and it not be a threat to the officers. But when they approach the suspect and he's swinging a knife, obviously they could be hit by that. The suspect could also throw the knife, and there's an argument to be made for self-defense there as well. But Just looking at the video, the scene plays out a little bit differently. It also should be pointed out that the officers were cleared of wrongdoing. I can't say is that I disagree with that assessment, but I still hold fast to the disagreement that the officers should have been called to that particular scene as a first resort. And that's kind of the problem. You know, they don't know what the threat level is when they show up, because they have no training in mental health crises. They don't know what they're walking to in most situations, let alone a mental health issue or a mentally ill patient who acts erratically. Like, you can generally plan on certain people doing certain things under certain situations, but mentally ill people don't necessarily follow those particular, I'll call them human rules, behavioral mores, right? It's a situation where police should have simply never been called in the first place. In addition to their lack of training, police are even less equipped to make judgment calls in situations where their duty is to protect themselves first, and then sort of innocent people that they assess second. And of course, the suspect comes in last on that list of priorities. While there's no previous footage from the body cam available, or at least the footage available from the news sources that I searched, their mere presence on the scene likely did much more harm than, say, a mental health professional that would have been familiar with Trappett or at least his particular condition. And the other part to this is we've been drip fed the compulsion to call the police at the drop of a hat. Basically, every single instance where we don't like what's happening, we call the police. One of my favorite podcasts, which is Music City 911, hosted by Brandon Hall, really cool guy. You listen to his podcast, you start realizing people call the police for everything. He did a discussion at CrimeCon where he set up fake calls. The calls were with the audience, but the calls were actually real. The scenarios were real, but they played them out with a script with the audience. And one of the calls was a lady at the drive-through window at McDonald's got the wrong order, and the manager is refusing to replace her meal. The woman called the police for that. That reinvigorates. I mean, I'm just gonna go on a limb and assume that this woman is entitled, right? For that's an argument to reinvigorate the entitlement. Entitlement signaling of people who demand police get their quarter pounder back from the manager. But in any case, this drip feeding that we've been fed to call the police about ridiculous incidents, this is our first response in mental health, crises as well, and it just needs to not be that way. My advice in nearly all situations involving people experiencing mental health crises is to never call the police as a first line of action. In fact, the only time anyone should ever really call the police when dealing with a mentally ill suspect, and there are several cases, most of them involve the suspect actually endangering someone's life. Okay, so that's really my standard. If the patient or suspect is or could become threatening or has a history of being threatening to the life and safety of other people, then yes, that call is justified. But most instances are simply not going to be like that. In this instance, yes, Trappett was carrying a knife, but it's also important to note that he only brought that knife out after police arrived on the scene. You can see that in the actual footage. They had already trained their guns on him and were yelling at him by the time he pulled this thing out of his pocket. So it can't really be assumed that he was threatening anyone in the home, unless they specifically stated that in a police report, or maybe the people at the house were. They did not report that in the news reports that I was able to find. So that's kind of where my research ends on that. But depending on the community, there should be resources available that do not involve bringing armed people trained in increasingly militant procedures to a scene where no armed conflict currently exists. Think about that. The minute you bring guns to a knife fight, the situation can only get worse. I don't know if anybody in my listening audience has ever had a gun pointed at them, but your entire physical being changes. I've had guns pointed at me, and I've pointed guns at other people. I've had to defend people from friends to loved ones against a threat that I've never actually fired my weapon, but on more than one occasion I have pulled my weapon to defend my safety and the safety of others. And the whole situation changes. It's a very different scenario once the guns come out. And if you're the sufferer of some mental defect, I can't imagine what the body chemistry does in that particular sufferer. I don't know. But if you have someone in your family who's mentally ill to the point that they either have a history or a potential of becoming threatening to the safety of others, you need to find your local resources before an instance goes down, right? You need to find someone who can respond to instances like the one that ended in Trappett's death before they end in your friend or loved one's potential death. I mean, 16 times more likely, that's a good enough number to pick up the phone and find your resources. We should care enough about our loved ones to create a plan in the event of crisis. I guess that's all I'm saying here. And this should include leaving the scene if possible. You should plan out issues. You should plan out escape routes, especially taking any young children or maybe some vulnerable people away from the suspect in the event of a crisis. Bottom line, calling the police should be your absolute last resort in most cases, and most especially in cases involving the mentally ill. Again, check out the original article for all the research I've done on this, and make your plan of action. That's it for this edition of Legally Insane News. Make sure to follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Kyle O'Donnell for updates and extras on this and other stories. If you're listening to this podcast at legallyinsanefilms.com or the Small Town Justice page, be sure to also download the Spreaker app, where you can directly subscribe and help me bump up my download totals. If you like this episode of Legally Insane News, consider becoming a supporting member. For just $3, you can get access to members-only unreleased articles and podcasts, case files on our latest investigations, updates for events and conventions that we're attending, and discounts on swag. To do that, just head over to patreon.com/legallyinsanefilms. There are 3 different memberships, each with more content than the one before. This is where I release all of my documentary films with outtakes and extras, as well as another podcast called Small Town Justice. You can check those out by going to legallyinsanefilms.com and clicking Join the Fan Club. Send any questions, comments, feedback, and show ideas to thejusticepod@gmail.com. This has been a production of Legally Insane Films, LLC. I'm your host, Kyle O'Donnell. We'll see you next time.